Hey, welcome back to another episode of Detection at Scale. Today, I'm here with David Seidman, who's the head of detection and response at Robinhood. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Can you give everyone listening just a quick background on who David is and what you're working on today?
So I am the head of detection and response at Robinhood. I manage both the software engineers who build the infrastructure for detection and response and the incident response team that's responsible for operations, writing detection, running incidents. Before Robinhood, I worked for a variety of larger tech companies, Salesforce, Google, Microsoft, all in a variety of detection and incident response careers with a little bit of AppSec before that.
Our listeners and both myself as well can get to know you a little bit better. What's the best thing about your life right now?
Well, I have two younger kids, a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and ski school has just started. It's my 5-year-old's first time, and I think my 4th year for my 8-year-old. And just watching the freedom that they experience going down the slopes and how much joy they take from an activity that I also love, my wife also loves, it really just warms the heart.
That's amazing. And you're doing skiing up in Seattle, right?
Right, outside of Seattle. Summit at Snoqualmie is the area we go to.
So yeah, this is definitely the time of year for that. A lot of people up in Tahoe and in Colorado. And yeah, it's a great time for that. So love to hear that.
We've had great snow, and then it's been raining every time we've gone up.
Is that good or bad? I don't ski, so.
Bad. Very, very wet and unpleasant.
Yeah, but I'm sure it makes you a better skier, right? Even though it's harder. Is it? I don't know. I was really excited to get you on the show just to talk a little bit about your background, talk about how you think about detection and response. You've worked in a lot of different places, Salesforce, Google, now at Robinhood, and you had a few others there on your resume as well. I want to start by talking about something that you had on your LinkedIn, which is about at Salesforce, you said you were pursuing unusual strategies to try to radically improve our ability to detect attackers and the speed of detection. And I'm super curious about what this is. You say, maybe someday I'll talk publicly about it. Is today that day? Can we get a little bit of a glimpse of some of those unusual strategies or just maybe your mindset around detection?
I think I can talk about this. The strategy that I was most interested in, I have a hypothesis. So you take the kill chain model, which hopefully listeners are familiar with. It's a series of steps that an attacker needs to go through, moving from no access to achieving their mission objectives. And the point of the kill chain model is you have to go through every single step. So the hypothesis is, what if we conceded most of the steps to the attacker and focused exclusively on a single kill chain step and put all of our efforts into detecting or preventing everything that we know of in that step? Could we achieve a very high detection rate by detecting everything they might do at that step? And of course, it needs to be an early step. Detecting exfil is a little bit too late. But if we can stop them from persisting through any of the dozens to hundreds of different techniques they might try, but maybe we can cover all of those instead of covering the hundreds to thousands of techniques across the entire kill chain spectrum, maybe that will give us a very high probability of detecting an attack. Unfortunately, I left Salesforce before I saw how well that strategy actually worked, but it was promising. It certainly is tractable. It's much easier to enumerate and then burn down the set of known attacks and detection for those attacks within a single kill chain than it is across the entire kill chain or across the entire attack matrix.
Is the idea there to have really high fidelity, and that's why you would exhaust it? And then the second part of my question is, are you looking at that technique across a variety of log sources to as well improve fidelity?
Yes, that's right. So the number one most important thing for that strategy to work would be to achieve broad coverage. Fidelity is secondary to that. In theory, you can deal with fidelity through a massive army of analysts. Now, we can talk later about why that's a terrible idea. And in practice, you need enough fidelity that your coverage is practically correct. Like, in other words, if you say that you have some detection rule that's going to detect some behavior, but it triggers false positives 20 times a day, when that true positive happens, the analyst is going to ignore it. They're going to think it's a false positive. They're going to click false positive, and you're not going to actually catch it. So even if you think you have broad coverage, you also need to have coverage that delivers enough fidelity that you don't get alert fatigue, that you can actually recognize the true positives. What that means is a deep subject. I don't know if you want me to keep going on that direction.
Oh, yeah. Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, this is really helpful for people to hear.
If folks aren't familiar with the term alert fatigue or alarm fatigue, I recommend you look it up. It actually predates detection, probably predates computer security. Anytime you're throwing alerts at people, if they are generally false positive alerts, the user, the analyst will be trained to ignore them. And they will assume by default that any alert they're looking at is a false positive. And they'll tend to start getting cursory in their investigations. They'll start doing investigations as a documentation function rather than as a function of determining truth. And when the true positive event does happen, they'll ignore it. This has even been responsible for airplane crashes in the past, responsible for industrial accidents. And in our field, it's responsible for missing true positives. We can all look at past incidents where, in retrospect, the SOC knew they were alerted many times and then they disabled the alert. Well, that's what you get when you have low fidelity alerts and your SOC is used to clicking false positive in their tooling. You can't expect them to recognize that 1 in 1,000 true positive. There are a few different ways you can deal with that. One is you can spend a lot of time tuning. But there's an implicit trade-off there. As you make your alerts more narrowly defined, you tend to increase the false negative rate. You tend to increase the attacks that you miss. And you can get around that through engineering investments, but it starts to get harder and harder to do it with a single piece of detection. You can get around it through automation. This is what I generally recommend and favor. A lot of those false positive cases can be automatically investigated and closed out. There are general cases of people doing their job who imitate attackers. You can reduce the false positive rate through prevention by getting your users who are doing suspicious things, like your system administrators or your power users who do suspicious things, to change their behavior so that they're no longer suspicious. And generally that will result in an improvement in security as well. For example, if you can get your real root users to stop logging in as root by giving them lower powered identities or tooling that will accomplish those tasks without having to log in as root, that improves your overall security and it improves your false positive rate. So those are all tools that you can use to improve the fidelity of your detection. The last thing that folks have been experimenting with is what you might call composite detection correlation, where you're not looking at individual events, you're combining them together. It's not a silver bullet because ultimately it is still a piece of logic. And no matter how you tune it, you can tune it so that it is very precise. But that requires effort. And if you don't put in that effort, it may not be any better than individual searches.
Yeah, I think composite detection is a really interesting one as well. And there's a lot of ways to do that as well. How have you seen that done in practice where it's been effective?
That's a great question. What I was actually going to say is what I've seen done in practice is mostly design documents that haven't been acted on. I think a lot of organizations have aspirations of advanced correlation, but I think the amount of time that they tend to put into them is relatively limited because, and I think that is because it's kind of a hard sell to your management. Like it's very easy to say, yesterday we had 200 rules, today we have 220, look, I'm 10% better. It's a little bit harder to say, we've combined these rules in this fashion and now we should be better. It doesn't demo as well. That said, what I have seen is when it's analyst driven is when it's most effective. When you have analysts who are saying, when I see this alert, it's typically false positive. But the way I determine that is by investigating this particular function. And I determine whether, so for example, you might say, when I see a root login, I look to see whether that user is actually active on their machine and whether their machine seems to be intact or whether there are signs that the machine has been tampered with. So that's something where you can combine correlation. Do we have other evidence of infection or compromise for that user or that machine with automation? doing things as simple as this doesn't work anymore, but did the user badge into the office this morning? Is the user currently at their desk based on our physical presence information? Is that user's computer active in other ways? Or is it 2 a.m. in the user's time zone? That's the kind of thing that you can get with automation. You combine that with, say, you're getting malware alerts off of that root user's computer, your internal persistent signatures are firing, and now you've got something that definitely warrants paying human attention to.
Yeah, it's almost like the analyst is following a DAG in their heads, right? They're saying, okay, I'm going to go to this point next, and then I'm going to check that. But if not, I'm going to start back at the beginning. It's really, really fascinating. I think that the composite detection as well could probably reduce some false positives that are fairly surface level. But then again, to your point, the mind of an analyst is like a detective. You know, you have to consider all these various angles, and every situation's different, and people don't follow all the same paths all the time, which is, I think, a reason why machine learning has been very challenging in security. But this sort of spawns a subject that I'm really curious about from your experience, which is just around detection in depth. So when I was reading your profile, while you were at Google, you were talking a little bit about the Google Cloud's event threat detection product, which to me seems like guard duty for GCP. Can you explain a little how this product works and what your team contributed to it while you were at Google?
Yeah, so first I should caveat that a few caveats. The product didn't ship to general availability while I was there. My team was a collaborator on the product. We developed part of the product, but we were not the primary product team. And I no longer work for Google, so anything I say here is my own personal representation. With all those things said, we had an interesting challenge at Google that we were developing Google Cloud and we were running our own infrastructure on Google Cloud, Google on Google, we called it. And that meant that as a detection team, we had to protect both the infrastructure and our own Google on Google assets. So if we have a VM running on Google Cloud, how do we protect that VM? And in particular, how do we protect the projects, the identities, and the other infrastructure that's special in cloud? We're pretty good at protecting compute images. We've been doing that as an industry for a very long time. But the web of identities and permissions in cloud and the unique functionality to manipulate things like spinning up and spinning down VMs, giving yourself permission to a VM as a project administrator, that was unique. And so as we developed detection to protect our own assets, very early we realized that much of that detection could also protect customer assets. The same attacks that we were worried about, customers were worried about. And the detection we were making for those attacks could also work for customers. And so we realized we could take what we were building, refine it to a level of quality that was acceptable to customers, and package it up and sell it as a feature. We also, as part of that, realized there were things customers wanted that we weren't building for ourselves, so we could also go off and build those. And there was this great synergy that as we built a product for customers, well, something you're going to sell for money is a lot easier to justify investing in than something you're doing just to protect yourself. You've gone from being a cost center to a profit center. And by attaching ourselves to a profit center, we were able to get investment that didn't always benefit us. Some of it went towards the customer value, but we were a customer. And so some of that spend benefited us as an enterprise as well. So it was a really nice case where the product side of the business and the internal side of the business could share value from the same work.
And you guys included a various types of analysis in that product, right? I mean, I think I was reading it's the combination of anomaly detection, and I think they were using like indicators, and they were using a lot of other complex techniques. I'm always really curious about systems that combine these various techniques of detection. And I'm curious, like, what your experience with that combination has been and if it's actually been valuable or not.
I think a lot of those features have developed and come together into the published product since I left there. I left Google in January of 2020, really well timed just before COVID. What my experience has been that those things tend to come together as ensembles, that you start with an individual rule or piece of detection, classic query style, or you start with an anomaly detection system that finds weird things, not necessarily suspicious things. And then you have a choice where a company building a product typically makes a choice to surface only the most reliable signals. We don't want to drown our customers in false positives. An internal company often will make that choice to accept a higher false positive rate because no one's going to complain to them except themselves, their own team. One of the interesting challenges in developing a product like threat detection is you have these models that work internally. How can you refine them to a level of quality that customers will accept without losing the value? And so what tends to happen is actually correlation. You tend to look for weaker signals that complement stronger signals. You also tend to take the most high fidelity, this should never happen type detection. So I can tell you, even though I haven't worked there in a while, I can tell you with certainty that what is part of the customer product is only a subset of what is part of the internal detection suite.
That makes sense. I mean, the internal suite is also a testing ground, right? And to your point, there's a reasonable level of quality you obviously need to deliver to customers. So I can imagine being at Google, having such a rich set of infrastructure and data would be really fascinating to play with these techniques together.
One other interesting aspect is the platform side. Building a platform that can handle very large amounts of data is difficult, as I think you know very well. Doing it at the scale of a company like Google is even more interesting because Google has infrastructure that can handle scale very well. Google also has infrastructure that can generate data at very, very large scale. And the infrastructure to generate data can overwhelm the infrastructure to process it if you're not careful. So we had to spend quite a bit of time managing the flows of data, processing of data, which data we collected. And I actually think that's a challenge in the industry that sometimes doesn't get enough attention. I've seen multiple companies that are building their own log ETL processing and alerting pipelines, their own data lakes, or they're mixing their own development with industry technology because it's just really hard to move all that data around. And especially because companies have such diverse IT environments, even off-the-shelf solutions often don't quite integrate with all the things you need, or they don't quite move the data around the way you need it to be moved around. I think that's actually still a growth area for the industry. I have a team of software engineers. I think that's kind of weird. Like, I don't know why we can't just buy something that uses all of these bits of data that are almost all using something common, widely available products. Why do we need to have our own thing? I don't really know that.
I'm working on fixing that problem, by the way.
Yes, that is true.
My best.
There are, and I should say that we've evaluated products, including Panther. And one of the difficulties actually is you have these giant suites of products, your internal code, and all of this infrastructure, this edifice that you've built up to solve these problems over the years. And there are a number of vendors who claim they can come in and replace that. And on the surface, their claims are credible, but it's a really big bet for me to make as the head of the detection team that I'm going to deprecate all of this existing infrastructure, put all my eggs in one basket. That's a tough call to make. Even if you feel like it's the right call, it's a hard one to bet your job on.
Yeah, I think there's layers to it, right? I mean, I think that there's always going to be a degree of data infrastructure that exists from within a company that you want to take advantage of and use. And then I think there's that first layer of filtering that you may want to do prior to sending to the vendor for whatever cost considerations or performance considerations. Even though this is big data, it's still not free, and you still have to make those considerations, right? You're playing on a bigger field now, whereas before maybe you're on like a little kiddie field. Now you're in a massive stadium, but that stadium still has the limit, and you have to really keep that in mind. It's not truly infinite as everyone says it is. Everyone's like, oh yeah, cloud scale, like cloud data warehouses, you put as much data as you want. It's like, okay, but they still have to go process that data in a way that is going to have implications on costs and performance. So it's the same, right? It's just the scales are bigger. So I understand the perspective of risk, but I don't know. It's more of philosophy, I think, right? Like you even said it yourself, like, why do I have software engineers? I agree with that. I think your team and security teams in general should just focus on security. Detection and response is really hard. Why do we have to manage our tool sets as well? And of course, if a vendor doesn't meet like your requirements, I can understand that. But for the core like ETL system or the core like just getting data and managing it, like my goal is to make a system to where security teams never have to think about it. And like we'll continue to refine and to address as many customer needs as we possibly have. So that's really just like the longer tail of it. And the thing that also makes it super challenging is everyone's different. And I'm sure you saw this across your time at Google and now at Robinhood and others, right? It's like every single environment's different. Everyone has their own way of doing it, which is, I think, another reason why security can be very challenging.
I think you and I were getting almost to the same point. I think part of it is that this is somewhat the frontier of one aspect of detection and response technology. Companies like Panther are redefining what a detection and response stack could look like. And that's pretty new. So it's not like we have this entrenched base of people who've been running Panther for 15 years. I think actually that one of the reasons why we haven't solved this problem yet is that companies trying to solve this problem are still pretty new compared to the history of the industry. And so I think it's taking senior decision makers and even down to people like me who are directly responsible for making a decision. It's taking us time to recognize what the product offerings are out there, how they're differentiated from each other, how they could work into a long-term strategic technology plan. There's time lags associated with all of that. So I do think that over the next few years, this is going to start to get much better.
Absolutely. And there's interesting things happening across security really as well, right? Like cloud security, whereas people may have been doing that internally in automation, where that was also probably done internally as well before these things existed. I mean, that's a big reason why we built things historically. I'm certainly included in that, where I built things at Yahoo and at Airbnb, right? We built it ourselves because there wasn't this great vendor support. And I think you bring up a really good point, which is that evolution into big data, into cloud data warehouses is still fairly immature. And I fully agree with that. And it's still, evolving with platforms even, right? With Snowflake and Databricks and others that have sprung up, right? So it's certainly a transition period that I'm experiencing from the other side now. But it's always fascinating to hear what your perspective is as a leader within a business that's, working really hard to secure and keep your customers safe and managing risk, right? Because at the end of the day, the decisions you make around infrastructure are balancing risk as well. So it makes a lot of sense. Can you talk a little bit about like some of the stuff that you guys are building? I mean, it says that on your LinkedIn, you said publicly that your platform team at Robinhood is building the pipes and engines. Curious a little bit if you can talk a little bit about how those things work or some of the stuff you've built that's been really helpful for you as a DNR leader. I think that'd be really interesting to people listening.
I'll say we do a lot of stitching together vendor products. And one of the goals of our team actually is to do as little as possible. We want to build platforms for Robinhood specific functionality, and we want to build things where we don't feel like the industry has cracked the nut, but where we can pay someone to do something, where we can pay for a generic solution. We absolutely want to do that. So we spend a lot of time, and we have spent basically the entire past year bringing in vendor systems that we thought would solve our problems. And that extends from log ETL, alerting, SEM, data lake, automation, and just we've actually replaced literally every single part of our stack over the past year. What we're trying to get to is a place where we can focus on interesting internal problems. We have these servers here that are generating this kind of information. An attack would span from those servers to these other servers, and those servers generate a completely different kind of log. How can we get those logs to join together in a useful way that we can write detection against? We also are interested in playing around with things like machine learning, where frankly, the industry does not have a great track record. But we have some folks on the team who have experience in data science. Knowing specifically what the scenarios are that we run, maybe we can make some targeted ML. One of the areas where ML has had a lot of success is in things like fraud identification, where a business knows its patterns, its customers, its fraudsters. And I think that we can achieve similar results with bespoke detection. That said, my optimism is tempered. At Google, we spent years of person years on it, and we got results, but it was expensive.
Yeah, I think you had a lot of great call-outs on that. It's been a big challenge in security to really get value out of machine learning, but I have hope. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of signs, and I'm learning a little bit more about what's developing. And I actually love the way that you described it earlier in the call, where you were saying everything comes together as an ensemble. And I think that's such a beautiful way to describe that process of combining a lot of these signals together to tell a greater story, or to really add to whatever like risk scoring or whatever you want to do to determine, okay, this is actually a bad thing I need to care about. I'm really curious about the response side. So we talked a ton about detection. We talked a lot about defense in depth, detection in depth. We talked about MITRE briefly, things like that. What does the mature incident response process look like to you today?
Wow, what a tough and deep question. Do you have an hour? Do you have a couple days?
Yes. No, I'm just kidding.
Write a book. And then a sequel to the book.
You did write a book, right? Didn't you write a chapter in a book about this?
Well, you know what? Is that still on my LinkedIn profile? I should take it out. My chapter wound up getting cut from the book.
Oh, no.
Co-author on one of the chapters. But I wrote the chapter, whether it was published or not. But it's accurate to say I wrote it. The book just wound up being too long. It was nothing to do with the quality of my content, I tell myself. But I think that there's a distinction actually between a great incident response team that most companies need and a great incident response team that a company like Google or Microsoft needs, because the type of attacks that those very giant companies face are different than the type of attacks that even a company like Robinhood that's very prominent, that has very sophisticated attackers going after us. The frequency of incidents and the type of incidents experienced at the very largest companies is qualitatively distinct. So I'll talk mostly about what a great incident response program looks like for a company that's not in that top 5-ish giants, because I think that's really more informative to most people. And what I look for there is, do you have a trained team of skilled incident responders? If you have an IR team that's never done it before, you're posed. You need some people on staff who have run real incidents in the past, real complex incidents. And for most organizations, that's just going to require hiring. The second thing I look for is process. Do you have one? Is it complete? There are templates for this stuff. I imagine ChatGPT could give you a decent one, but you still need to have it, and you need to think through things like, how are you going to contact your lawyers at 2 a.m. on Saturday? If you have a legal issue in a foreign jurisdiction, how are you going to contact them? Do you have a connection through your communications team? Do you have a connection to your customer support team? If there was some issue where customers were lighting up your support phone lines, how are you going to prepare your support team to handle that? There are lots of these intricacies of process that you need to think through ahead of time. And that leads me to one of the things I think is most important to an effective IR program is exercises. You are not going to get enough real incidents, and you're not going to get hard enough real incidents to keep your team in top shape to handle the worst day of your company's computer security history. You need to simulate those. Ideally, it would be a red team simulation, a live fire simulation, if not a tabletop exercise, but you need to practice often. Because those skills are like muscles. They atrophy if they're not used. They develop if you use them. And so you have to get that practice in. So when I look at an incident response program, one of the keys to determining how effective it's going to be is how often do the incident responders practice. I think it's also important to practice with those people around you. So I know many teams will do the incident response simulation within the IR team, but it's actually important that your customer support contact and your legal contact and your comms contact and your internal networking contact, that they also participate, because they're really going to be the ones who have no idea what's going on when you call them at 2 a.m. So they're the ones who need to have some hands-on experience with it, even more than your team does. Your team will make it happen. They might be completely lost. There is a technical aspect as well. Do you have the permissions and tooling to get the forensic data that you need? Can you gain access? Do you have EDR in the first place? Does your team have access to the EDR? Is it actually installed and accessible on the machines it needs to be on? Do you have access to all of the CloudTrail logs? How much of your log data historically are you retaining? Are you doing any kind of binary collection and retaining historical binaries so that you can go back and see how long ago you were infected? Having access to data is a place, again, where I've seen teams fall down. Even very experienced and skilled teams go to access some environment, some project in AWS or in GCP or in Azure, and they don't have permissions. And the whole investigation stops while they try and track down whoever does have permissions, and they're paging 5 different on-call teams. That's a tough problem to address. Even teams that have put a lot of effort into exercises and into getting permissions still run into those roadblocks. But that also is a part of the program that I think is good. Programs have thought about this and have made efforts to address it.
I think you also covered something important as well when we were talking about detection, which was the ways that we would respond to alerts. You were saying in order to prevent alert fatigue, you have automation that just pings users because users like to behave like attackers, even though they're not. And then you made a really good call out on prevention as well. So really strong controls and just the right pieces in place to just stop anything from happening by default, like giving the team the guardrails. How do you think about, besides like tabletops, like how can you train analysts to be better? Because it's really difficult, right? Like it's really hard to know what a breach looks like. So what's been your approach as a leader?
That's actually a great question. And I don't know that I have a great answer to it, to be honest. I think that the experience I've had is that there really isn't a substitute for real world experience. I have had success with cyber range type activities where it's, in a sense, it is an exercise, but it's a very deep, contrived exercise where participants are dropped into a very deeply, broadly simulated incident and asked to figure out what's going on and deal with it. I think also analysts naturally make a progression in their career from, I have no idea what any of this means, to I've seen this kind of alert a million times and I know the basic run book, to I am the person that people come to when something is weird because I know those weird tricks and I know how our systems work. And I think that as analysts make that progression, they become more and more able to deal with the unknown unknowns, with the unpredictable. In a sense, it's not intentional training. It's just the career path of an analyst. But I also think that it's something that is sometimes underappreciated when folks think, I'm going to hire the cheapest SOC analyst I can find. We're going to go all entry level, low billable rates. Look at how many people I hired for the amount of money that you gave me. And then something unusual happens and everyone looks around not knowing what to do. And it's not their fault. Entry level people are entry level. But if you develop a program that does not include people beyond entry level, there won't be anyone to help you when something more complex happens.
That's absolutely right. You need the variety of people, different backgrounds, even backgrounds in different environments too can be really helpful, especially depending on which cloud you use and which corporate infrastructure you have. You know, are you Windows? Are you Mac? Are you Linux? Like all of these things matter quite a lot because at the end of the day, a lot of good analyst work is understanding what the system's doing. And if you know what abnormalities could exist there, and you can just translate things like alert IDs, event IDs, things like that, you just automatically understand what that means. It means that we're safe from AI replacing our job anytime soon. So I don't know, maybe not. Like maybe the AI can start to understand how machines work better than us.
I mean, I think if you went back to 1998 and you told them how much is done automatically for us today, I think they would consider it AI.
Like what? Automatically in what sense?
Well, if you think about the era where people were literally manually looking through log files or running registers on log files. Maybe 1998 is a little bit too late, but
you gave me PTSD by saying this.
I know. It's like we don't like to think about those times, but there was a time where people printed out the log files and went through them with a Sharpie. There was a long period of time where people really were looking for log files, looking through every instance of a particular ID. And if you look at a more advanced organization now, the analyst is presented with an alert that has been pre-filtered for false positives. It's been risk scored. It's been correlated with other alerts. It's been ingested with a bunch of data. It's been formatted to put the most likely data in front of the most interesting data in front of the analyst. It is displayed with a timeline of other activity by that user, other activity by the relevant machine, other instances of the same alert. They oftentimes just have to make a really quick call, like, yes, this is real. No, this isn't. That is light years beyond what we could do before. The amount of data that an analyst has to look through to get to the important part is a fraction of what it once was. So I think that from that perspective, it's similar to how people don't think of Google as being an AI. It's just a search engine. But if you think back to 1980 and tell them that there's going to be this box, you type in anything you want to know and it will give you the answer, I think that most people then would have considered that quite intelligent. I think we've reached a similar place. And just like Google, we're not done. Google doesn't write your homework for you. I guess maybe now ChatGPT can. That's a little scary. None of our software triages our alerts for us down to every last true positive and false positive. But you can see that we're marching towards that.
My hope in the future is that we are able to solve the breach detection problem in a lot more of an intelligent way. And things like machine learning developments can certainly help there. Things like correlative, temporal-based systems can help there. And I'm trying to think if there's even a better way as well in the future for us to do it that we're not even thinking about yet. And I'm sure there is, but I look forward to those days where defenders are armed with really great tools to stop both the basic and the hard things from happening without needing this tribal knowledge. Because as you point out, it's so hard to get it unless you have real world experience. And people like us who've worked in these companies, we're very privileged in the knowledge that we've gained. And it's super hard to replace that. It's hard to build that mentality and take that experience, put it into a product. It's certainly evolving, and I agree. Things have gotten so much better in the last 10 years since I've been in industry as well. I'm not grepping through log files on NFS mount anymore. I'm using a big data system that's processing things in real time, and it's just like light years beyond where we were then. And I think the next 10 years we'll also see the same things. But this has been an awesome conversation. I have one more question for you to sort of tie everything together. You've had such an incredible background and quite a journey in security. And I'm really curious what 3 actionable pieces of advice you can give people listening in to be a better DNR leader or just really build a really great DNR team in the future.
Number 1, do more exercises. No matter how many you're doing, it's probably not enough, especially red team if you can. Red team exercises are gold. They're the only attackers who tell you when you miss them. Obviously, red team exercises are expensive, and you can't do 1,000 of them. So tabletop exercises are your next best. And I find that virtually every organization underinvests in this. Piece of advice number 2, have a philosophy of detection coverage. Know how you're planning to get there, how you're planning to get to coverage that your organization considers acceptable. That could be taking the attack matrix and trying to tick every box. It could be rapid iteration with your red team where they're finding things and you're fixing them and you're measuring how much harder it gets for them to compromise things over time. It could be that you're securing your most important assets, your crown jewels. None of these are clearly superior to the other, but you can waste a lot of time by going back and forth between them. So pick one, stick with it, make progress against it, and then you'll actually achieve something rather than having this mishmash of detection that doesn't comprehensively do anything. Number 3, don't reinvent the wheel. You are not CrowdStrike. You are not going to create it as an AV agent, an EDR agent as effective as they can create with their company full of people working on nothing but this. So buy where you can, build only where you have to. I think a lot of organizations, we hire engineers. Engineers like to build stuff. Engineers can always find a reason why the commercial product isn't perfect for their exact scenario and want to go build their own thing. It's a fun temptation. I have an engineering background. I love building things. It's not a great use of your organization's time or money. buy what you can't, what you can, build what you have to.
David, thank you so much for the time and for the insights. This was a really amazing episode, and good luck to all the things you're working on with Robinhood. Thanks for keeping our money secure, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks. Thanks for having me on. And I really appreciate all you're doing with Panther. So keep up the good work.